It's strange how silence can be louder than any sound you've ever heard, and that's exactly what I felt the deeper I walked into the rainforest. The Amazon was supposed to be alive with constant noise, birds calling, insects buzzing, branches cracking under the weight of unseen animals. But on that day, every sound had vanished, and all I could hear was the heavy rhythm of my own breathing. Imagine walking for hours under a suffocating green canopy, dripping with sweat, your shirt glued to your back, and then suddenly realizing that the forest has gone quiet, as if it itself was holding its breath. The locals had told me about this place in whispers, fishermen by the river who swore there was a ghost town hidden somewhere deep beyond the map trails, a place no official record ever acknowledged, a place erased by time. They warned me never to look for it, never to follow the old trails that led into the dense jungle, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I wanted to know if it was real, if a whole town could exist unseen, unrecorded, hidden like a scar the world tried to cover. Have you ever heard a story that kept echoing in your mind until you felt you had no choice but to go after it, no matter how risky? That was me. And so there I was, moving forward even as everything inside me told me to turn back. My flashlight beam cut through the thick air, dust motes swirling in its path. The ground beneath me felt wrong, too soft, too untouched, as if no human foot had walked here in decades. I thought about the warnings, the serious tone in the voices of those who spoke of this town. Why would they insist so strongly that I never go there? What were they afraid of me finding? With every step, I felt a chill crawl down my spine, despite the oppressive heat of the rainforest. It was as if the forest itself had eyes, watching me, waiting for me to cross some invisible line. And as I wiped the sweat from my forehead and adjusted the strap of my bag, I asked myself the question that I'll now ask you. If you were walking alone in the heart of the Amazon and suddenly realized that even the animals had abandoned this place, would you keep going? Or would you run back the way you came? The story of this ghost town had been haunting me long before I ever set foot in the forest. It started with quiet conversations by the riverbanks in a small Amazonian village where I had been staying for a few weeks. At night, while the fishermen mended their nets and shared stories, the tone of their voices would change whenever someone mentioned the place that doesn't exist. They never called it by name. Some claimed it never had one, while others said speaking it aloud would bring bad luck. But all of them agreed on one thing. It was a town hidden so deep in the jungle that maps refused to show it. The government didn't acknowledge it. No guidebook referenced it, and yet everyone seemed to know someone, a cousin, a grandfather, a friend of a friend, who had once heard about it or even claimed to have seen it before disappearing forever. That contradiction was what pulled me in, the way their eyes darted around nervously when they spoke, as if the trees themselves could hear them, and the way they would lower their voices until they were almost whispering. One fisherman, an old man with skin like leather from years under the sun, leaned close to me one evening and said, "Don't follow the river north. Don't take the old trail beyond the fallen saber tree. That path leads to silence." His words stayed in my head, replaying over and over again. A path that leads to silence. What could that possibly mean? Was it a warning, a metaphor, or just a way to scare outsiders like me? The more I heard, the more I wanted to know, because I've always believed that legends are born from truths that people are too afraid to face. So I prepared myself. I studied the maps I could find, but none of them showed anything where the fishermen insisted the town was. I packed a small bag with water, food, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a notebook, though deep down I doubted any of it would really protect me from the unknown. What was I even expecting to find? An abandoned settlement overtaken by vines and roots, ruins swallowed by the forest, or maybe nothing at all, just emptiness and the disappointment of chasing after a ghost story. Still, something inside me told me that this was more than just superstition. I had seen the way the fishermen crossed themselves when the subject came up, the way their faces turned pale under the dim glow of the oil lamps. People don't act like that if it's just a tale for children. The day I set out, the jungle was in full voice, buzzing with life. But as I pushed further away from the river and deeper into the old trails, the sounds began to fade. The further I walked, the less I heard, until eventually the silence pressed in from all sides like a heavy blanket. It was the silence they had warned me about, the one that seemed to swallow not only the forest, but also my thoughts. Hours passed, and I found myself wondering if I had gone too far, if maybe I had made a mistake. The sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy above, and I followed what seemed to be the remnants of a path, though it looked like no one had walked it in decades. My boots sank slightly into damp soil, and the vines twisted around me as if they were trying to hold me back. Every so often, I thought I saw something ahead, a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping between the trees. But when I raised my flashlight, there was nothing. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in faint streaks of orange visible through the treetops, I knew I was close. Not because I could see buildings yet, but because of the change in the air. The forest didn't just grow quiet. It felt unnatural, wrong, like a place cut off from the world. I couldn't hear a single bird, not even the hum of insects. And in the Amazon, that's impossible. It's never silent here, unless something drives the life away. And that was when I finally admitted to myself that this was no ordinary search. This was not about finding an old, forgotten village. It was about stepping into a place that the forest itself had rejected. I paused, tightened the straps on my backpack, and took a deep breath. Ahead of me, the trail disappeared into shadows. Behind me, the way back seemed to vanish too. And standing there, I knew one thing for certain: whatever waited for me in that ghost town was not meant to be found. The deeper I went, the more I felt as though I was trespassing in a place that didn't want me there. The path was barely a path at all now, just faint impressions in the ground, maybe once carved out by people who had long since disappeared. Vines coiled across the trail like snakes, and roots rose from the earth, twisting into shapes that almost looked like skeletal fingers reaching up to stop me. Every few steps I had to duck under branches heavy with moss, their damp weight brushing against my shoulders like cold, clammy hands. My flashlight beam cut across the trees, but instead of reassuring me, it only seemed to reveal more shadows waiting just outside the circle of light. I kept telling myself it was just the jungle, that I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was walking just out of sight, keeping pace with me. The silence pressed harder against me the further I went. Normally in the Amazon, even at night, the air vibrates with life. Frogs croaking, crickets singing, nocturnal animals stirring. But here it was, as if all of creation had stepped aside, leaving me alone in a hollow pocket of nothingness. I began to notice how loud my own movements were, the crunch of leaves under my boots, the squeak of my backpack straps, even the sound of my heartbeat seemed deafening. Once, I stopped completely and held my breath, straining to hear anything. Nothing, not even the wind. That was when I realized I was standing in the exact kind of silence the old fisherman had warned me about. A silence that wasn't natural, a silence that felt imposed, like the jungle itself had been muted. I pushed on, driven by equal parts fear and fascination. I wanted to turn back, but the curiosity burned hotter than the terror. My flashlight beam caught something ahead, a crumbled wall of stone, overgrown with roots, barely visible under the thick green curtain of vines. My chest tightened. Was this the first sign? I hurried closer, and sure enough, it looked like part of a foundation, man-made, not natural. My heart raced as I traced my fingers along the moss-covered surface. There was no doubt now, people had lived here once. This wasn't just a story whispered by fishermen. Something real was waiting ahead. As night closed in, the forest seemed to push tighter around me. The trail narrowed until I was squeezing between trees, their bark slick with moisture, their shapes bending in unnatural ways that made me think of faces frozen in mid-scream. I stumbled over what looked like an old wooden post buried halfway in the dirt. Maybe a marker, maybe a forgotten fence. Each discovery made me more certain that I was walking deeper into something I shouldn't, and yet my legs kept moving forward, like I wasn't fully in control anymore. It was as though the path itself wanted me to continue. My body was exhausted. Sweat drenched me. Mosquitoes swarmed but never bit, a detail that unnerved me more than comforted me. In the Amazon, insects are relentless. Why weren't they attacking here? I brushed my arms, my neck, but the buzzing that should have been there simply wasn't. It was like even the smallest creatures refused to cross into this place. That realization sent another shiver down my spine. Then, through the curtain of trees, I caught sight of it, rooftops, or what used to be rooftops, jutting above the undergrowth like broken teeth. I froze. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, conjuring shapes out of shadows. But as I stepped closer, the outlines became clear. Collapsed huts, wooden beams half swallowed by the earth, and beyond them, taller structures leaning precariously as if they had been abandoned in a rush. My stomach twisted. I had found it. The ghost town no map dared to show. Standing there on the edge of that forgotten place, I felt torn between wonder and dread. This was what I had come for, proof that the stories were real. But at the same time, every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back before I stepped inside. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, wiped the sweat from my eyes, and whispered to myself, just a quick look, just to see. Yet even as I said it, I knew I wasn't going to turn back. Not now, not after coming this far. I stepped forward slowly, almost against my own will, until the trees parted just enough to reveal what lay beyond, and for the first time, I saw the ghost town with my own eyes. At first glance, it looked like the forest had grown tired of waiting for the town to crumble and had simply decided to consume it whole. Vines draped over crumbling rooftops like thick curtains, their roots spilling down through broken windows. The dirt streets were almost invisible beneath layers of moss and creeping plants, but I could still trace their paths, laid out like veins of a body that had stopped beating long ago. Wooden houses leaned to one side, as if bowing under an invisible weight, their doors hanging open, creaking faintly, though no wind stirred. It was the kind of sight that should have felt empty, forgotten, but instead it felt too alive, as though the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to step further inside. I walked cautiously down what might once have been the main street, my flashlight beam dancing across facades frozen in time. A rusted bicycle leaned against a wall, its wheels half sunk into the ground, but the chain still gleamed faintly as if it had been oiled not too long ago. I paused at a doorway where an old chair sat tipped onto its side, as if someone had risen in a hurry and never returned to set it straight. My stomach churned with unease. Everything here looked abandoned, yet there were details, small, unsettling details, that suggested abandonment hadn't happened centuries ago. It felt recent, unnervingly recent, like the town had been alive until just yesterday. The silence was the loudest part of it all. In the jungle, silence is rare, impossible even, but here it stretched endlessly, pressing into my ears until I thought they would burst. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the hollow echo of my footsteps crunching on dirt that seemed too dry, too brittle compared to the damp forest floor outside the town's edge. I found myself whispering without realizing it, as if speaking louder would wake something sleeping. Hello? The words slipped from my mouth and seemed to vanish into the air, swallowed whole by the silence, leaving nothing behind. The more I looked, the more wrong everything seemed. A small church sat at the far end of the street, its cross tilted, its doors chained shut with rusted links that looked decades old. Yet scattered around its steps were candles, burned down almost to the base, wax still fresh, as if they had been lit not long ago. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Someone had been here. Maybe someone was still here. My mind raced with questions. Were these offerings, warnings, or evidence that the town was not as empty as I thought? I turned a corner and entered a narrower alley where the shadows felt thicker, clinging to the walls like oil. A window caught my attention. Its glass was shattered long ago, yet inside I could see a table set with dishes. A cracked cup beside a plate still holding the faint outline of food long turned to dust. A sudden wave of nausea hit me, not from the sight itself, but from the strange realization that the chair beside the table was pulled out, angled as if someone had just stood up and walked away. I gripped my flashlight tighter, my knuckles turning white. I was being swallowed by the feeling that I wasn't walking through ruins at all, but through a place still inhabited by memories too strong to fade. Every step forward deepened my unease. Doors swung lightly on broken hinges, even though the air was perfectly still. Windows gaped open like eyes, staring as I passed. I couldn't shake the thought that I was being watched, not from the forest, but from within these houses, from behind curtains of vines and shattered glass. I dared not look too closely, afraid of what I might see staring back, and yet I couldn't turn back either. The town had its grip on me now, pulling me deeper with each hesitant step. At the center of the town, I stumbled upon a dried-out fountain, its stone cracked, its basin filled with nothing but dust and dead leaves. Around its edges, symbols were carved into the stone, half erased by time but still visible, circles overlapping, strange marks that didn't belong to any language I recognized. I traced them with my fingers, and the stone felt warmer than it should have, pulsing faintly beneath my touch, as though it still carried some kind of energy. I pulled my hand back quickly, my heart thundering, and for the first time I asked myself if this place had been abandoned by choice or by force. Then it happened. A sound, faint but undeniable, the creak of wood shifting under weight. My blood ran cold. It wasn't me. I spun around, flashlight beams slicing through the dark, but the street was empty, as still as before. Yet the sound had been real. I knew it. My legs trembled and I fought the urge to run. I had come here to uncover the truth, and now I was standing at the edge of it. The ghost town was no longer just a forgotten place. It was something else, something that felt aware of me, something that had noticed I was there. The deeper I walked into the town, the more unbearable the silence became, until it felt like a physical presence pressing against my chest. I've been in quiet places before, libraries at night, empty churches, even deserts where the air is so still you can hear your own blood rushing in your ears. But this was different. This silence wasn't absence. It was suffocation, as though something had deliberately stripped sound away and replaced it with a void. I tapped my boot against the dirt road just to break it, but the sound didn't echo. It fell flat, swallowed instantly, like a stone dropped into bottomless water. I clapped my hands once, desperate to reassure myself I wasn't trapped in some dream. The sharp crack died before it even reached the walls around me. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just quiet here. It was as if the town itself didn't allow sound to exist. The realization clawed at me, and my mind raced to make sense of it. How could nature itself go silent? Where were the insects that should be buzzing? The bats that should have been stirring at dusk? Even my own breathing felt wrong, shallow, almost artificial, as though the air itself resisted carrying noise. My footsteps echoed faintly in my skull, but didn't travel outward. I couldn't even hear the sound of leaves shifting in the trees, though I saw them moving gently overhead. It was like living inside a muted recording of reality, and every instinct screamed at me that something was profoundly wrong. I moved forward anyway, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand, the beam cutting across the hollow shells of houses. My imagination twisted the shadows into faces, into figures leaning from doorways, into shapes darting just beyond reach. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired, dehydrated, but then I noticed something that made the hair on my arms rise. A door that had been closed when I first entered the street was now ajar, swinging slowly back and forth, as if someone had just slipped inside. My mouth went dry. I froze, trying to convince myself that maybe I had simply misremembered, but the creak of the hinge was too deliberate, too fresh. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for something to emerge, but nothing did. I pressed on, and that's when the signs began to multiply. A window shutter slamming softly against the wall, even though there was no breeze. a trail of footprints in the dust that hadn't been there minutes before. The faint glow of a candle flickering inside a house I was certain had been dark earlier. Each detail was small on its own, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to face. I wasn't alone here. My flashlight beam wavered as I forced myself to step closer to the house with the candle. The window was broken, jagged glass clinging to the frame like teeth, and through it I could see a table with melted wax dripping down its center. The flame danced faintly, struggling but alive. I swallowed hard. Who had lit it? Where were they now? The silence grew heavier with every step, bending my thoughts into paranoia. My ears strained desperately for any sound, even a whisper, even the distant cry of an animal. But there was nothing. I began to realize how much we rely on background noise to stay sane. Without it, every thought grew louder, every doubt sharper, until I couldn't tell if the creaks and shuffles I imagined hearing were real or just echoes of my fear. I caught myself spinning around more than once, certain I had heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind me, but each time the street lay empty, shadows stretching long and motionless. Still, the feeling never left, the sense that if I turned quickly enough, I would finally see who was following me. At one point, I stopped in the middle of the street and whispered to myself just to test the air again. "You're imagining it," I said. My voice trembled, brittle and small like a child's. The words vanished instantly, eaten alive by the silence. I tried again, louder this time. "Who's there?" But there was no echo, no response, just the oppressive stillness folding tighter around me. My throat constricted, and a cold sweat broke across my forehead. It wasn't just silence, it was resistance. The town was pushing back against sound itself, rejecting it, as if my voice didn't belong here. I wanted to run, but my legs felt anchored. I wanted to scream, but I knew no one would hear me. So I kept walking, forcing myself down a narrow side street lined with houses that seemed to lean closer together, crowding me like conspirators sharing a secret. My flashlight beam flicked across doorways, across cracked windows, across walls covered in moss and strange carvings I couldn't decipher. Every line, every mark seemed to pulse with the same unsettling energy I had felt earlier at the fountain. And then, just as I began to wonder if I had completely lost my mind, I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable. A breath, not mine. A slow, deliberate exhale from somewhere close. So close it felt like it was on the back of my neck. I spun around, heart pounding so hard I thought my chest would burst, but again there was nothing. Only the empty street, only the silence pressing down like a tomb. I stumbled backward, flashlight shaking in my hand, my thoughts spiraling. This town wasn't just abandoned, it wasn't just forgotten. It was alive in its own way, and it was watching me. The silence wasn't a lack of sound, it was a warning. And now, I couldn't help but wonder if I had already crossed a line I wasn't supposed to. I don't know how long I stood frozen in that suffocating silence, but eventually my body forced me to move, one trembling step at a time, deeper into the forgotten streets. My flashlight flickered across warped walls and splintered doors, and the more I looked, the more the town seemed less like ruins and more like a stage set waiting for its actors to return. Every detail felt staged, deliberate. The chair half tipped over, the bucket left at a doorstep, the rope hanging from a beam, as if life here had been paused mid-motion. I told myself it was all coincidence, the result of decay and time. But then I saw something that made my breath hitch in my throat. Ahead of me in the dust of the street were footprints, not old ones, not weathered or faint, but fresh, sharp impressions cutting deep into the ground. I crouched down and touched one with my fingers, the edges crisp and clean. My stomach dropped. Someone had been here minutes ago, maybe they still were. I straightened slowly, my flashlight trembling, and swept it across the street. The beam caught on a house to my left, its door slightly ajar, swaying gently on its hinges. I knew I hadn't touched it, my gut clenched, and I took a step closer, my ears straining for the slightest sound. That's when I noticed it, the faint orange glow flickering inside, the unmistakable light of fire. I leaned toward the doorway, peered through the crack and felt my blood run cold. On a small wooden table inside, a candle burned, its flame bending as if disturbed by a breath. The wax ran down in thick streams, fresh and warm, pooling onto the dusty wood. My throat tightened. In a town that should have been abandoned for decades, a flame was still alive. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe I wasn't the first outsider to find this place. Maybe someone else had stumbled upon it too. But deep down, I knew. The fishermen hadn't warned me about other explorers. They had warned me about the town itself. I stepped back, heart racing. But the door creaked louder, opening wider, as if inviting me in. My flashlight beam darted nervously across the walls, catching on more details. A child's toy, half buried in dust, a rope of dried herbs hanging above the doorway, and on the floor near the candle, scuffed marks as though someone had dragged their feet recently. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something stronger, some mixture of fascination and dread, kept me rooted. I felt as if leaving now would mean never knowing the truth, and yet entering would mean stepping into a place I might never escape. I turned quickly at a sound behind me. It wasn't loud, just the faintest shuffle, like fabric brushing against wood. My flashlight swept the street, but it was empty. The footprints, though, there were more now. I could have sworn there had only been a few before, but new ones stretched further down the street, leading deeper into the town. My skin crawled. I wasn't imagining this. Something was moving, and it wanted me to follow. Against all reason, my legs obeyed. I walked, each step heavy, the silence pressing harder, the air growing colder, as if night had arrived only here. The trail of footprints led me to a square where a fountain stood, cracked and dry, the same one I had touched earlier. But now, something was different. Around its base, more candles burned, their flames small but defiant, casting trembling shadows on the carved symbols in the stone. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I had left this fountain behind hours ago, and it had been lifeless then. Now, it was alive with fire, each candle freshly lit, each flame too new to be coincidence. My chest heaved as the realization hit me. I wasn't just being watched, I was being guided. Suddenly, a loud creak shattered the silence, so sharp it made me flinch. I spun toward the sound, flashlight jerking wildly, and caught sight of a door slamming shut at the far end of the square. My pulse spiked. Someone, or something, had been standing there. I rushed forward before I could stop myself, the beam bouncing violently as I ran, but when I reached the door and shoved it open, the room inside was empty. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, of burned wax, of something older I couldn't place. My flashlight swept across the walls, and that's when I saw it. Fresh handprints smeared in dust, sliding downward as if someone had pressed themselves against the wall moments earlier. I staggered back, a strangled gasp leaving my throat. They weren't old, they were fresh, the dust still unsettled in the air. My hands shook as I stumbled out into the square again, my flashlight barely steady. The silence was heavier now, but beneath it I swore I could hear something, low, rhythmic, almost like breathing. It wasn't mine, it was the town's. I stood there surrounded by the glow of candles that shouldn't exist, footprints that hadn't been there before, doors and windows shifting on their own. The truth clawed at my mind, and it was undeniable. The ghost town was not abandoned. It was awake. I tried to convince myself that I still had control, that I could turn back if I wanted to, but the truth was already slipping through my fingers. Every direction I looked, the streets seemed to twist into each other, looping back in ways that didn't make sense, as if the town itself were rearranging its bones to trap me inside. I walked quickly toward the path I thought I had come from, but when I reached it, I realized I was standing in the same square with the cracked fountain again, the candles flickering defiantly against the dark. My chest tightened, panic gnawed at me, and yet I couldn't bring myself to scream because I knew no sound would carry in this place. The silence was a cage, and I was locked inside. I took another street, forcing myself forward, my boots scuffing against the dust. Shadows leaned across the walls in strange angles, stretching unnaturally far from the faint light of my flashlight. The sensation of being watched had grown unbearable. It wasn't just a prickling at the back of my neck anymore. It was a weight pressing on my shoulders, a constant awareness of eyes that never blinked. Every doorway seemed to conceal someone just out of sight. Every shattered window was a mask, its jagged teeth framing empty rooms where figures might be waiting. My pulse thundered as I turned a corner, only to freeze at what lay ahead. More footprints, but this time they weren't leading away. They were leading toward me, dozens of them, crisscrossing the dust like a swarm of invisible people had been circling the very spot where I now stood. I backed up slowly, my flashlight darting wildly, catching glimpses of objects that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. A rocking chair swayed back and forth, though no wind stirred. A curtain flapped inside a window, but the glass was sealed tight. The silence seemed thicker now, almost vibrating, and I realized I could no longer hear even the faint sound of my own footsteps. I stamped the ground hard, desperate for proof that I was still real, still there, but nothing reached my ears. It was as if the town had stolen the sound of me, erasing me piece by piece. My throat closed, and I whispered my own name just to hear something, but the word was swallowed whole before it even left my lips. I stumbled backward, fighting the nausea rising in my gut, when suddenly the candlelight flickered violently around me. One by one, flames guttered out, leaving trails of smoke that twisted upward like ghostly fingers. Darkness closed in, and that's when I felt it. A presence, close, circling, testing me. My light caught movement at the edge of vision, a door slamming shut down the street, a shadow sliding across a wall, too fast to be human. My breathing came fast and shallow, and I realized that the obstacle wasn't just the silence or the strange signs of life. It was that the town was actively trying to keep me here. My escape routes were vanishing, paths collapsing into themselves like a maze tightening around its prey. I could almost hear the voice of that old fisherman again. Don't follow the path that leads to silence. Now I understood what he meant. The silence wasn't a warning of absence. It was the lure of a trap. I forced myself into a sprint, the beam of my flashlight jerking with every step. I didn't care where I was going anymore, I just wanted out. But the faster I ran, the more the town seemed to fold around me, twisting its streets into endless repetition. I passed the same house twice, the same broken window with the same child's toy lying beneath it. My legs burned and my lungs ached, but still I ran. Until finally I stopped, chest heaving, to find myself standing once again in the square with the fountain. The candles had relit themselves, their flames dancing mockingly in the heavy silence. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the ground, choking back a cry. There was no escape. I was caught in something far older, far stronger than me. And then, just as despair settled over me, I heard it. Not sound exactly, but vibration, like a low hum that wasn't carried through the air, but through the bones of the town itself. It thrummed under my feet, rattling the stones and spread through the air like a heartbeat. My skin prickled, and I felt certain that the town had finally decided what to do with me. I wasn't a visitor anymore. I was prey. The vibration under my feet grew stronger, spreading up through my legs, until it felt like my entire body was trembling in rhythm with something vast and unseen, like the town itself had a heartbeat, and I was caught inside its chest. I staggered backward, my flashlight shaking wildly in my hand, and its beams swept across the square, catching on windows, on doors, on the cracked fountain. But then it froze on something else. For the first time since I entered this place, I wasn't staring at empty streets or hollow houses. In the far corner of the square, half shrouded in shadow, there was movement. Slow, deliberate, undeniably human-shaped. My breath hitched, and I blinked hard, thinking it must be my exhausted mind inventing figures from the dark. But no, the shadow swayed, then stepped forward, revealing the faint outline of a figure standing unnaturally still, its head tilted, watching me. I raised the flashlight higher, my hands trembling, and the beam caught it for only a fraction of a second before the light sputtered, dimming as though drained by the very air. What I saw in that instant burned into my memory, a face that wasn't a face at all, pale and blurred, as though hidden behind a thin veil of smoke, eyes nothing but dark pits reflecting the flame of the candles around the fountain. I stumbled back, my heel striking the fountain's stone edge, and nearly fell. When I steadied myself and swung the beam again, the figure was gone. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out everything, but then another sound cut through, a door slamming violently to my left, then another behind me, then the sharp crash of shutters snapping shut one after another. The silence had broken at last, replaced by a storm of noises that seemed to come from every direction at once. Wood groaned as if pressed by invisible weight, glass shattered, and the flames of the candles flared higher as though feeding on my fear. My flashlight blinked frantically, and in those gaps of darkness I saw them. More figures, silhouettes at windows, shadows leaning from rooftops, all motionless yet undeniably aware of me. My throat tightened, a strangled cry forcing its way out, but it sounded pitiful and small, swallowed before it reached the edges of the square. I spun in place, desperate to find a way out, but every street leading from the square was now blocked, some by doors that had slammed shut across the road, others by walls of shadow, too dense to penetrate. The realization hit me with crushing force. The town wasn't just alive, it was awake, and now it was closing in. I turned back toward the fountain, and the symbols carved into its stone glowed faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm that vibrated beneath my feet. The hum grew louder, resonating in my bones until I thought they might crack, and as it did, the air thickened, pressing against me like water. I gasped for breath, dropping to my knees, my flashlight slipping from my hand and rolling across the ground. Its weak beam spun in circles, cutting through the dark, long enough for me to see more footprints forming in the dust, dozens, hundreds of them, appearing as if stamped by invisible feet all around me. I grabbed the flashlight, clutching it like a lifeline, but it sputtered again. And in that momentary blackout, I felt something brush against my arm. Cold, deliberate, like fingers tracing my skin. I jerked back with a gasp, shining the beam wildly, but the square was empty, or at least it looked empty. The figures were gone from the windows, the doors were still again, and yet the sense of presence was overwhelming, suffocating, undeniable. My chest heaved, sweat dripped into my eyes, and I realized I was no longer just an intruder here. I was a participant. The town had seen me, acknowledged me, and whatever ritual had bound this place in silence had now pulled me into it. Then came the whisper. It was faint, almost impossible to detect at first, just a thread of sound curling through the heavy air, but in a place where sound should not exist. It was deafening. My blood froze. A single word, stretched and distorted, though still somehow clear enough to understand. Stay. It slithered into my ears, reverberated inside my skull, and for a moment, my body obeyed. My muscles locked, my lungs forgot to breathe, and I felt the crushing weight of the command. Stay, stay forever, stay in the silence. My mind screamed against it, forcing my legs to move, forcing my chest to drag in a desperate breath. But the weight of that word clung to me, dragging at my every step. I stumbled backward from the fountain, my flashlight beam darting across the square as if it too were panicked. The figures were back again, only this time closer, lining the edges of the buildings, their blurred faces all turned toward me. My heart thundered, and I knew the climax had come. I couldn't run anymore. The town wanted me here, and now I had to face it. I don't know how I managed to move, but somehow my legs carried me stumbling away from the fountain, even as that single word, stay, echoed in my skull like a brand. The figures at the edges of the square didn't chase me, yet they seemed to close in with every step, their blurred faces flickering in and out of the shadows like images burned onto the air. My flashlight beam trembled across walls and doors until it caught something that stopped me cold. A mural, hidden beneath layers of vines and grime, stretching across the side of a crumbling building. I wiped at it frantically with my sleeve, smearing away dirt, and what emerged made my stomach lurch. Painted in faded pigments was the image of a crowd, men, women, children, all standing in front of this very square, their faces painted over with dark smudges, their mouths wide open in silent screams. At the center, beneath a sun that bled red paint across the wall, was the same fountain, its stone basin overflowing not with water, but with black lines that resembled flowing shadows. The symbols carved into the fountain's edge were drawn there too, glowing faintly even through the paint, and beneath them was a phrase scrawled in letters I could barely decipher. "The silence keeps them." My chest heaved as I stumbled back, my mind racing to connect the pieces. Was this town sacrificed? Did its people vanish all at once, swallowed by the silence I now felt tightening around me? The footprints, the candles, the doors opening and closing by themselves. It wasn't just haunting. It was repetition, a cycle, something still alive. My gaze darted across the mural again, and for the first time I noticed that the black lines flowing from the fountain weren't just shadows. They formed the outlines of figures rising upward, their bodies twisting into shapes eerily similar to the blurred faces I had seen watching me. These weren't spirits trapped in one place. They were part of the silence itself, bound into it, sustained by it, and now they wanted me to join them. I turned, gasping for air, and staggered into one of the houses, desperate for cover, for anything that wasn't the open square. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wax and mildew. My flashlight swept across the interior, and I froze again. On the floor, drawn in dust and ash, was a circle of symbols, identical to those carved on the fountain. Only here, they were fresh, their edges sharp, as though someone had traced them minutes ago. In the center of the circle lay more footprints, overlapping, twisting in a spiral, as if countless unseen feet had walked there in endless repetition. My pulse thundered. This wasn't decay. This was ritual. Suddenly, the whisper returned, louder this time, filling every corner of the room. Not one voice, but many, layered on top of each other, rasping and echoing in unnatural unison. Words I couldn't understand poured out, yet I felt their meaning press against me, a promise of eternity, of being part of something endless. My flashlight flickered violently, and in the strobing light I saw them, figures lining the walls inside the house, watching me silently, their features blurred, their forms half solid. They didn't move, didn't breathe, but their presence filled the space until I felt like I was drowning. I stumbled back into the doorway, choking, clutching at the frame for balance, and as I did, one of the figures tilted its head slowly, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. The whispering ceased in an instant, replaced by silence so sharp it rang in my ears. And then I heard the word again, closer, stronger, inside my head this time. Stay. I staggered outside, gulping air that felt no less suffocating. My thoughts spiraled as I tried to process what I had seen. The candles, the footprints, the whispers, it all connected to the same idea. The people of this town had never left. They hadn't died in the way we understand. They had been absorbed, devoured by something that transformed them into fragments of silence itself. They were the silence, and now they were reaching for me, pulling me closer to join their endless, soundless existence. My body trembled, my knees nearly giving out, and I clutched my head as if I could shake their command free. Stay, stay, stay. The word pressed deeper into my skull, threading itself into my thoughts until it felt like my own. That was when I realized the true horror. The town didn't need to chase me, didn't need to kill me. It only needed to break me down slowly, strip away my sound, my will, my sense of escape, until eventually I would surrender, until I would want to stay. The silence wasn't just a prison, it was a seduction. And standing there, staring at the fountain glowing faintly in the distance and the murals screaming faces behind me, I understood the fisherman's fear. They hadn't been warning me about danger in the ordinary sense. They had been warning me about inevitability. Once you found the ghost town, it never let you go. I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment I was staring at the mural. The next I was stumbling down the street, my flashlight beam jerking wildly as I fought to keep my footing. The whispers chased me, not with footsteps, but with pressure, filling my skull with words that weren't words, crowding every thought until I could barely remember my own name. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I forced them to move, slamming through alleys, weaving between crumbling houses, desperate for any path that would take me out. The town twisted around me again, streets folding into themselves, doorways appearing where none had been. But I refused to stop. I clawed through vines that slashed my skin, ducked under beams that cracked above my head, and then, suddenly, the trees returned. One moment there were houses on either side of me, the next I was crashing into undergrowth, branches tearing at my arms. I didn't dare look back. I didn't dare see if the town was letting me go, or if I had simply slipped through by accident. The forest around me was different, though. The sounds hadn't returned. No birds, no insects, just the pounding of my own heart and the ragged gasps that tore from my throat. I stumbled forward for what felt like hours, until finally I heard it, the soft rush of the river, faint but real, a sound so ordinary it nearly brought me to tears. I collapsed at its bank, pressing my hands into the wet earth, gulping air as if it were the first breath I'd taken in days. My flashlight flickered once more, then finally died, leaving me in the pale light of dawn breaking through the canopy. The river shimmered silver in the growing sun, and for the first time I thought I might actually survive this. But survival doesn't mean freedom. Even now, as I sit here writing these words, I can still feel the weight of the silence pressing against me, as though it followed me out of that place. At night, when the world should be alive with crickets and wind, my room falls deathly quiet, and I hear the faint crackle of candles burning in the dark. Sometimes, when I walk across the floor, I notice extra footprints beside mine in the dust, sharp and fresh. And once, just once, I woke to find my bedroom door ajar, though I knew I had locked it tight. I tell myself it's nothing, just my mind unraveling after what I saw. But deep down, I know the truth. The ghost town isn't just hidden in the Amazon. It's here, with me. It left its mark the moment I stepped inside, and maybe that's the secret no one tells you. You never really leave. The silence becomes a part of you. It lingers in your breath, in your thoughts, waiting for the day you stop fighting and finally accept its command. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, surrounded by that unbearable quiet, I swear I hear it again. Soft, patient, certain. A single word, whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. Stay.